In June 1914, Franz Ferdinand, the Archduke of Austria, was assassinated by a Bosnian Serb extremist. This single event would start the conflict between Austria and Serbia and later become what we know today as World War I. World War II's greatest legacies were laying the foundation for World War II, as well as the ideologies that would be responsible for World War II and the Cold War, notably, socialism after the Russian Revolution. But what if the Russian Civil War and Revolution never happened? Would World War II still have happened? Would Russia be more powerful? To explore these ideas and this scenario, we will have to lay out some changes in the timeline so Russia can be realistically strong enough and have the morale to survive the German offensive. The first of these is that Russia mobilized, let's say, 300,000 troops before the German offensive began in Poland and the push from Austria-Hungary. This is so that the Russians don't immediately get overwhelmed by the offensive, which leads to later supply and logistics issues, and so on and so on. The second is that the Russians never lost the Sino-Japanese War in 1905, thus never losing control of Port Arthur or Mukden. This would mean Russia would still be respected as a great power by its allies and populace, with the support of Nicholas II remaining high in the empire as it begins to industrialize under his reign. And so we start with 1914 when the Austrians and Germans declared war on Serbia with retaliation from the Entente. Now in our timeline, incompetent leadership and military handling from the Russians led to a very successful offensive from the Germans. In this timeline, with the Russians being stronger militarily, the Russians managed to halt the German offensive in Poland to much of a standstill, relieving pressure from the French in the west. Meanwhile, the French and British intervene as the Germans push through Belgium, causing British troops to soon land on French soil and a mobilization of troops by Britain and France. Upon news of the Ottomans soon joining the war, the Tsar ordered a new offensive into Austria to help their allies in Serbia. As the offensive began, the Germans waged another offensive into Russia, this time going deeper into the counter at the expense of resources and troops in their western offensive. By the time the German offensive slows down, Russian officials convince Romania to join the war, with Bulgaria joining the Central Power soon after. These two nations would lead to a new focus on the Balkan front, incentivizing the Ottomans to now rush preparations to join before their chance to regain land in the Balkans ended. The first move by the Central Powers is to overwhelm Serbia, with Bulgaria later taking Macedonia and the Austrians taking North Serbia. By early 1915, with the Ottomans joining the war, the offensive begins with the Bulgarians taking it upon themselves to invade Romania, with the Austrians following suit. With this being very unexpected by the Tsar and Entente, Romania is quickly overwhelmed with Serbia just barely holding on. This makes the Tsar and Russian leadership paranoid about a new German and Ottoman offensive, causing the mobilization of over 2 million troops for preparation of an offensive against the Ottomans along with a greater defensive line against the Germans. These actions by the Russian government resulted in a decrease in support among the population, with the fall of Romania weakening morale among the military and war supporters. Russia prides itself on being the protector of the Slavs, so Romania almost collapsed under the weight of the Austrians and Bulgarians, with the Bulgarians being their very own Slavic brothers is seen as both bad press for the Russians and betrayal by the Bulgarians, so for the Tsar to increase war support again and the offensive in the South Caucasus in Ottoman territory quickly begins. With over 400,000 soldiers marching into the Ottomans' lands, this offensive went decently well, although the Russians' full ambitions of getting into Anatolia were not met, with the Ottomans being very resilient through Russian offensives. The Tsar and Russian leadership next turned their eyes onto the German front, with the British and French now warning them of a soon-to-come German offensive. The Russians decide to do a reverse card and to a counter-offensive before an offensive was there in the first place. By the winter of 1915, the offensive was launched with limited success, with a muddy and less operation-suitable ground available, but by the spring of 1916, the offensive began to accelerate with more gains in the Baltic and Belarusian as well as Austrian regions. This would also come with a British offensive on the Ottoman Empire from Egypt, convincing the Arabs to go against the Ottomans, along with the Americans announcing that they would also join the war on the side of the Entente. This would cause the Germans and Austro-Hungarians to look for any Entente point for an offensive, as Serbia was fully defeated by Bulgaria by mid-1916. There would also be a German offensive in France, although making limited if at all progress to Paris and overall wasting German resources. As the British blockade deteriorated German supplies, the German government and populace began to become desperate. In the winter of 1916, another Russian-led offensive was made in the Ottoman Empire. Although successful, it was halted after the beginning of a German offensive on the Eastern Front. In response, the British continued their campaign in the Middle East, causing revolts in Iraq and Syria. By 1917, the first pool of 100,000 American troops would arrive in France, pushing back the Germans almost to Belgium and marking the end of the Western Front. On the Eastern Front, the Russians made significant advances towards Austria-Hungary, although soon causing the country to divulge into a civil war. In the Balkans, the Bulgarians were almost left alone in Europe, as the Entente made their way through the Yugoslavs and Greece and the Ottomans begin to be carved up. On the Western Front, the Germans are now pushed back to their border as riots and revolts begin in Berlin against the monarchy, and the proclamation of the Weimar Republic, with the support of the Entente, is established as the new official government of Germany, and as their first action they decide to leave the war, soon signing a treaty along with the Ottomans, Bulgaria and the rest of the Entente. After the Great War, with Russia remaining a monarchy and a military great power in Europe, Russia would cement itself as a great power, being a major player in world politics and the League of Nations, being ranked among the United States, British and French. The Germans, similar to our real timeline, would also suffer economic difficulties similar to that of the Great Depression and early 1930s. But without the Russian Revolution, neither socialism nor other more extreme ideologies would take place in Europe as they did in our timeline, possibly never being a Second World War or Cold War. But what do you think? Could there be a Second World War? I'd like to see your answers in the comments below, but before you go, I'd appreciate it a lot if you help get to 10,000 subscribers. You can always unsubscribe and it's free, but if not, why not watch another video?